Republican Congressman Tim Burchett, who serves on the House Oversight Committee, which is leading the investigation into President Biden. Congressman, thanks for being here. If this doesn't warrant any new substantial evidence, will you vote to impeach President Biden?
Well, I'd like to see all the evidence put forth to the country. There's $30 million that have flown through Hunter, and the indications are what we've seen is that it was just Hunter was just selling influence, and it sure wasn't Hunter's influence. It was his daddy's influence, and the question remains though: was this all done while he was vice president? Does that carry over when he's president? And that's why there's an inquiry. We didn't move to an impeachment like they did Trump, just in a quick secret meeting in the skiff and then bring it out to the floor kind of thing. And the speaker's catching a lot of grief, but the reality is, Ms. Collins, that he is just following the rules, and these are the rules of Congress, and we're not gonna jump over anything, and we're gonna bring all the evidence forward and then allow Congress and the American people to make a decision.
You just mentioned the evidence that Republicans already have gotten. I mean, using their subpoena power, they got 36,000 pages of bank records, 2,000 pages of the suspicious activity reports of the Treasury Department, dozens of hours of testimony from people who used to work with Hunter Biden. And still, Senator Chuck Grassley, who's been deeply involved in this, says he has seen no evidence of Joe Biden being connected to his son's business dealings. I mean, have you seen any evidence of that?
Other than the recent $5 million from the communist Chinese to Hunter, it took a very circuitous route. I know you think that's a big word for somebody from East Tennessee to use, but in fact, it did take a circuitous route. Hunter Biden was involved in a $5 million transaction. It went to Hunter. It went to one of his 22 shell corp. Well, that's the circuitous route. It went to James Biden, President Biden's brother, and then there's a $40,000 check to President Joe Biden. So if the thing is, will this line up with all that? And that's the question. And I think that's why we're doing this route instead of just running him up to the hangman's noose.
If you don't see anything new or substantial than what we've seen, which so far none of it has connected to President Biden himself, despite how it's kind of been fashioned every time we've heard from people, are you going to vote to impeach him if nothing new comes out?
Well, if it's $40,000 that flowed through a communist Chinese when President Biden said, in fact, he was not involved with it, he said he never talked to him, and then we had testimony that there was. We have we've got the email from the bank saying, hey, we need to get out of business with these folks. They're not selling a product. And of course, everybody says, well, what about Trump? And you and I both know Trump sold cheap steaks and crappy ties. He at least had a product. And all Hunter Biden was selling was influence, and obviously the Biden name. And I think if testimony does show that President Biden was involved in some sort of pay to play or bribery type scheme, then yes, I will vote to impeach him. But if it does not show anything, then I won't. That's the bottom line.
When we hear the complaints about influence peddling, I covered the Trump White House. I didn't hear a lot of complaints from Republicans then about, his children and what they were making from their father being president. But when it comes to President Biden himself, I mean, what are the specific crimes that Republicans are investigating Joe Biden for?
Well, I'm glad you brought up his children because, as you well know, they were subpoenaed and showed up multiple times in the skiff in a private deposition, and public, which Hunter decided not to do. He said his last thing he said in his so-called interview out that Schwab arranged for him, that he said, and I will answer all your questions. And then he did just like his father did. He turned around and walked off and got into his taxpayer subsidized Suburban and drove off.
That statement that he came out and gave yesterday, but his offer is to testify publicly. His argument is that if he does it behind closed doors, the Republicans will twist his words or whatever he says. I understand you don't like the prospect. You want him to come behind closed doors, but why not just have him testify publicly? Why not take him up on that offer if you have the questions that you say you have?
I don't have a problem with it, but you know as well as I do, it'll just be time to showboat. And that's what they did during the Trump impeachment. They did it behind doors, and then the Democrats walked right out and leaked everything that was said in the skiff. And that's why you do it in a secure environment, the skiff. You can't even take your cell phone in there. and it was just a constant
But
leak.
you would be
They
fine with him
controlled the
testifying
narrative.
publicly, you're saying?
I don't care. I don't care where he does it. I'd like to ask you. I like him to answer some questions, because he's either going to have to tell the truth or he's going to have to plead the fifth, and that's all he can do. If he lies, he's gone. But if you look at all there's two other folks in the Trump administration that refused to testify, and they were held in contempt of Congress. And yet you're not seeing that with him at all. And so I would hope that he's held up to the same standard as everybody else is.
There were a lot of your Republican colleagues who also were subpoenaed and did not respond to those subpoenas. So I think that's why there's questions about how much credibility they have.
That was in a special committee, the January 6th committee. And as you remember, Nancy Pelosi wanted to select the Republicans, and she did. She wouldn't allow Jim Jordan to even be on that committee.
Well, these are people who were talking to President Trump on January 6th, and I think there were questions about whether or not they could investigate something that they were deeply involved in. But I do want to ask you, because from your committee, we last saw the first impeachment hearing back in September. It was very chaotic. Even Republican witnesses who were there said they had not seen any direct evidence or firsthand evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. There hasn't been one since. Do y'all have one planned? Is there going to be another?
I don't know. That's up to Chairman Comer and, of course, Chairman Jordan. But if you remember, it started off as every couple of months something came out, and then it became every couple of weeks, and it just became about every couple of days. That was the latest with the $5 million with the Communist Chinese. And you have to remember, Joe Biden said, my son's not involved in any business with the Chinese, when, in fact, there was a $5 million transfer.
But is that what you're going to impeach him over? Saying his son wasn't involved in something?
If he lied, obviously, to be in Washington, it's almost a prerequisite now to lie in either party. But if we found out that there was, in fact, influence through the Communist Chinese to President Joe Biden, then yes, ma'am, we should. China is an enemy of this country, and we better start admitting that and taking full awareness of their capabilities, because they are in every aspect of our lives right now.
We have seen no evidence of that. We'll see if this inquiry turns that up.
Well, that's what the inquiry is all about.
There's been a lot of evidence collected so far, as I just laid out, and still nothing tying it directly to President Biden. We'll obviously continue to follow it closely. Congressman Tim Burchett, I see you're in the car there. I know you got to go. Thank you for your time tonight.
Yep. I hope you have a very politically incorrect Merry Christmas, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Congressman.